Wyoming Territory, 1877. The wind howled through the cottonwoods as the sun dropped behind the Bighorn Mountains, spilling gold over the dry grass. On the edge of his land, Solomon Avery swung an axe into a pine trunk, breath catching in the cold dusk air. Behind him, the soft clatter of children's laughter rolled out from the open barn door. He had not laughed in a long time. It had been 7 months since Mary died. Fever took her fast, 3 days from the first sweat to the last breath. She left him with 3 children: Owen, age 10, who should have been out riding colts by now, 6-year-old Clara, quiet and watchful like her mother, and baby Ruth, still in swaddling clothes when Solomon buried his wife under the cottonwood tree. He had not expected to raise children alone. He had not expected to feel so hollow inside. "Pa!" Owen called from the barn. "Clara says the calf's sick again." Solomon wiped sweat from his brow and trudged across the yard. His boots crunched over frost-bitten dirt. The barn door hung crooked on its hinge, and inside, Clara knelt beside the calf, her thin hands on its heaving side. Solomon crouched beside her. "It is just the cold, sweetheart. We will keep him close to the stove tonight." Clara nodded, her face pale. She had not spoken much since Mary passed. Just did what needed doing. Later, after the children were fed and tucked in by the fire, Solomon sat at the table with his head in his hands. He was 33, worn down and drifting. The ranch was barely holding. The milk cow was drying up. He had not seen another adult in over 2 weeks. And then someone knocked on the door. He froze. It was full dark outside. No rider had come up the trail. No wagon. No sound of hooves. Just a knock, firm, steady. Solomon stood slowly and opened the door. A woman stood on his porch, wrapped in a brown wool coat with mud on the hem. Her dark blonde hair was braided down her back, her face pale from the wind. She held a little girl in her arms, fast asleep, her cheeks red from crying. "I am sorry," the woman said, voice hoarse. "I need help." Solomon stared. "I am Evelyn Grant," she said. "This is Olive. She is 5. Her father left us near Rawlins. Said he was going to trade for food. Never came back. We walked for 2 days. She has not eaten since yesterday." He looked past her, toward the darkness. No wagon, no supplies, just a woman and a child who had been abandoned. "Come inside," he said quietly, stepping back. She hesitated, then stepped into the warmth. The child stirred in her arms but did not wake. Solomon closed the door and took her coat. Evelyn set the child down on the blanket near the fire, then knelt beside her, fingers trembling. "I did not know where else to go," she whispered. "I saw your chimney smoke." He nodded, not sure what to say. He had not expected this. Clara peeked out from the hallway, her eyes wide. Solomon gestured gently. "This is Evelyn," he said. "And her daughter, Olive. They are going to stay with us tonight." Clara nodded once and slid back into her room. Evelyn looked up. "I can work," she said. "I can cook, so tend the little ones. Just let us stay until I can figure what to do." Solomon studied her face. She was about his age, worn by hardship, but there was a steadiness in her blue eyes. She had walked through miles of wind and cold for her daughter. He respected that. "You do not owe me anything," he said. "You and Olive can stay as long as you need to." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "Thank you." That night, Evelyn slept on a cot near the fire with Olive curled against her side. Solomon lay awake in his bed, Ruth tucked in the cradle beside him. He did not know what had just begun, but something had shifted. The next morning, Evelyn was already feeding the fire when Solomon came into the kitchen. She had braided Clara's hair and was showing her how to knead dough. Owen helped milk the cow, glancing shyly at Olive, who sat wrapped in a quilt beside the stove. By noon, The house felt warmer than it had in months. Over the next few days, Evelyn fit into the rhythm of their lives like she had always been there. She patched Owen's torn coat, taught Clara how to hem, and sang soft lullabies that made Ruth stop fussing. Olive clung to her mother at first but began to follow Clara around the yard, the two girls whispering secrets with their heads bent close. Solomon watched all of it from the porch, arms crossed. He did not know what he was feeling, only that the quiet in the house no longer felt hollow, felt full. One afternoon, he came in from the barn and found Evelyn scrubbing the floor, sleeves rolled up, hair in a loose knot. She looked up at him, cheeks flushed. "You do not have to work yourself to the bone," he said. "I like to keep busy," she replied. "Helps me think." He nodded. "What are you thinking about?" She paused. "About staying," she said. "Not just for the night. Or the week." His chest tightened. "I mean," she stood, brushing her hands off on her skirt. "If it is all right. Olive is sleeping through the night again. She asks about Clara every morning. I am not sure what is waiting for us out there. But here." She met his eyes. "It feels safe." He swallowed hard. "It is." She smiled, small and sincere. Solomon had not expected to feel this again. Not after Mary. But watching Evelyn laugh with Ruth, hearing Olive's giggle in the kitchen, he realized the ache in his chest was not just grief anymore. It was hope, the kind of hope that came from something real growing in the ashes. He did not know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain. He wanted her to stay. The snow came early that year. Not heavy, but enough to whiten the edge of the fields and bring a brittle chill into the mornings. Solomon rose before the sun, as he always had, but now when he stepped into the kitchen, the stove was already warm and the scent of cornmeal filled the air. Evelyn stood by the table, sleeves pinned up, her hands dusted with flour. She looked over and gave him a slow nod, not a smile but something steadier. "I found a sack of dried apples in the cellar," she said. "Figured they ought to get used." He leaned against the doorframe, watching as she pressed dough into a tin. "They were Mary's," he said quietly. Evelyn didn't pause. "Then I'll make sure they're used right." That was how she was never rushed, never asking for more than the day gave her. She moved through the house like she had always known its corners. Not as if she belonged, but as if she respected what had come before. Later that morning, Clara sat at the table with Olive, showing her how to stitch a scrap of muslin. Both girls bent low over their work. Ruth napped in the cradle, a faded quilt draped around her. Owen had gone with Solomon to check the fence line along the northern pasture, bundled in a wool coat 2 sizes too big. At the far end of the yard, the gate sagged where the last storm had pushed it loose. As Solomon lifted it back into place, Owen crouched beside a post, tapping the frozen earth with a rusted nail. "She says she used to sew shirts for the army," Owen said. Solomon looked down at him. "Who told you that?" "The widow," Owen said she did it back when they were in Kansas. "She don't talk much about it, though." Solomon rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "She's got her own story. Let her tell it when she's ready." Owen nodded, then drove the nail into the post with a rock. That afternoon, Evelyn knelt beside the stove, feeding in small logs. When she stood, her fingers were smudged with ash. "You ever lived this far west before?" Solomon asked, setting down the water pail. "Only as far as Cheyenne," she said. "Before that, we were near Fort Scott. My uncle ran a tannery." He poured water into the basin, watching her from the corner of his eye. "And Olive's father?" She straightened, brushing a hand over her skirt. "He was a man who liked to start things. Never much for finishing." Solomon didn't press. She hadn't offered more than that, and he respected the line she'd drawn. That night, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Evelyn stood by the window, arms folded tight across her chest. Solomon walked in from the porch, brushing snow from his hat. "I fixed the latch on the barn," he said. "Should hold through the night." She turned toward him. "There's a kind of silence out here I haven't known before. Good or bad? Different," she said, "but not unwelcome." He nodded, then stepped close enough to see the faint crease between her brows. "You don't have to keep looking over your shoulder," he said quietly. "There's no one coming after you." "I'm not afraid of him," she said. "I'm afraid of what's next." He didn't answer at first. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like breath through a hollow reed. "We build it one day at a time," he said finally. "Same way I'm trying to do." She looked up at him, her face lined with something too old for her years. "You miss her." "I always will," he said. "But missing her doesn't mean I can't see what's right in front of me." Evelyn didn't look away. She didn't speak either. But her hand, resting at her side, brushed lightly against his. And for the first time since she had arrived, she didn't pull away. By mid-December, the sun barely cleared the treetops before slipping behind the ridge again. The days narrowed into thin slivers of light, and the nights stretched long and cold. In the hush of those hours, Evelyn began mending not just shirts and mittens, but the quiet places inside her that had been torn thin. One morning, Solomon found her in the lean-to behind the house, sorting through a barrel of dried beans with Olive perched beside her, humming tunelessly. The girl's cheeks were chapped, but her eyes were bright. "Didn't expect to see you two out here," he said, shifting a stack of firewood to his hip. "Olive's been getting restless," Evelyn said, not looking up. "I figured if we were going to be stuck inside another storm, we might as well get ahead on soaking the beans." "You think it's going to snow again?" "I can feel it in my back," she said. "Always could." He set the firewood down and crouched beside them. "You used to live near the river, didn't you? That kind of cold sticks to the bones." "I was 13 when we moved out of Missouri," she said. "That winter, the snow came in sheets. My mother soaked rags in lard and wrapped them around our feet so we could sleep without freezing." Solomon rubbed the back of his neck. "We didn't have much when I was young, either. We packed mud around the floorboards just to keep the wind from whistling through." Evelyn glanced at him. "You said you grew up near Sweetwater?" "South of it," he said. "My father ran cattle, same as I do now. He passed before I married." Olive reached for a handful of beans and dropped them into the bucket with a soft clatter. Evelyn brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You ever think about leaving here?" she asked. Solomon leaned against the wall, eyes on the yard. "I did once. Thought about Texas. But Mary liked the quiet here and we had the land. After she died, I didn't see much point in starting over." Evelyn's eyes didn't waver. "And now," he turned toward her. "Now I think starting over might not mean leaving." They didn't speak after that. But Olive slid her small hand into Evelyn's lap and leaned her head against her mother's side. And Solomon stayed a while longer than he meant to, listening to the sound of beans falling like rain into the tin bucket. That night, as the wind picked up and rattled the stovepipe, Evelyn sat near the hearth with Ruth in her lap. The baby had taken to her easily, curling into her arms with a kind of trust Solomon hadn't seen in any of his children since Mary's passing. He sat across from her, running a worn whetstone over his knife. "You ever think about teaching?" Evelyn looked up, surprised. "Me? You've got away with them," he said. "Clara's started reading aloud again. And Olive, she's changed." "I used to teach Sunday reading," Evelyn said, "back in Leavenworth. Just the younger ones. I never had much schooling myself." "You don't need much," he said. "You've got the patience." She glanced toward Clara, who sat in the corner stitching a patch onto one of Owen's shirts. The girl's brow furrowed in concentration, her tongue pressed to her lip. Would it be strange? Evelyn asked, her voice low. To stay on like this? Solomon set the knife down. No, she met his gaze. There was no hesitation in his eyes, only a steady quiet. I've known men who expect a woman to disappear into their house, she said, to stop being herself the moment she steps over the threshold. I wouldn't ask that of you. I know, she said. That's why I'm not afraid to ask this if I stay. Would it be just for the children? Or something more? He stood and crossed the space between them. Ruth stirred in her arms, then settled. His hand moved slowly, brushing a bit of lint from Evelyn's shoulder. I buried a good woman, he said, and I never thought I'd care for anyone again. But you walked through snow and silence and fear to protect your daughter. And every day since, you've stood steady in this house like you were meant to. That's not something I could ever turn away from. She looked down at Ruth, then back at him. I'm not asking for promises, just truth. I'm not giving promises, he said, only offering a place beside me if you want it. We can build something quiet, something strong. Evelyn's breath caught. Her hand moved to cover his, where it rested near her shoulder. I do want it, she said. Outside, the wind dropped. Inside, the fire burned low and warm. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But something passed between them that was deeper than gesture, a vow spoken without words, made in the hush between heartbeats. The first true snow arrived in the night, heavy and wet, blanketing every fence post and rooftop in white silence. By morning, the sky had cleared, pale blue and brittle with cold. Evelyn stood at the window, her arms wrapped around herself, as the sun caught the drifts along the pasture and turned them to gold. Behind her, Clara bundled Ruth into a quilt. The baby's breath came in soft puffs of steam. Olive sat cross-legged by the hearth, carving a sliver of wood with her small knife, tongue pushed tight to her lip. Solomon came in from the barn, boots caked in snow and breath rising like smoke. He set down the water bucket and glanced at Evelyn. The trail's gone under, he said. If we need anything, it'll have to wait. She nodded, turning from the window. We've enough to last? He pulled off his gloves. We'll make it through the week. She crossed to the stove, lifting the lid to stir the pot of beans. I can stretch what's left. But once the flour's gone, it's gone. We'll go into town once the pass clears, he said. No use worrying before that. She ladled the beans into a bowl and handed it to him. You always speak like the ground won't shift beneath you. He gave a quiet breath of amusement and sat on the bench. It shifts. I've just learned not to jump every time it does. She sat opposite him, folding her hands. Were you always this steady? No, he said. Took years. And losing things I didn't think I could live without. She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't need to. Later that day, Owen came in with his cheeks red from the cold, a burlap sack slung over one shoulder. Found the trap still set, he said, setting the bag down. One rabbit. Could have been worse. Evelyn opened the sack and checked its contents. You didn't see tracks? Some, but no big ones. Just snow hairs. That's good, she said. Means the wolves haven't come down yet. Owen looked up. They do. She nodded. When it gets bad in the hills, they'll come looking for the calves. You'll know by the silence. Solomon came in behind him, setting his rifle on the wall peg. You've seen it. Once, south of Laramie. They circled a homestead for 2 nights before a fire drove them off. Owen's eyes went wide. What did the people do? They kept watch, she said, and didn't leave anything outside they wanted to keep. That evening, Clara lit a stub of candle, while Evelyn sat cross-legged mending a button on Owen's shirt. Solomon was oiling the hinges on the front door, and Olive leaned against the table leg, humming low. You ever think about what you'd do if the ranch didn't hold? Evelyn asked, not lifting her eyes from the shirt. Solomon set down the oil tin. I think about what I'd do to keep it holding. That's not the same. He wiped his hands. No, but it's all I've got. She threaded the needle in silence, then said, I used to think I'd end up in Kansas City. Never made it. Got as far as Abilene before it all unraveled. You wanted city life? Not really. Just wanted to stop wondering where the next meal would come from. Back then, I thought a bigger town meant steadier ground. And now, I think steadiness comes from people, not place. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her. You think you've found that here? She looked up. I think I'm learning how to stop running. The candle flickered in a draft. Solomon crossed the room and pressed his hand flat against the sill. Loose board, he murmured. I'll patch it tomorrow. Evelyn folded the shirt and set it aside. You always fix things before they break? When I can, he said, then added. You don't have to be afraid of the roof caving in. I'm not afraid of the roof, she said. It's the quiet that scares me. He tilted his head. Why? Because it's unfamiliar, she said. Because I'm starting to want it. Neither spoke after that. But when he lit the lantern and she stood to take Ruth from Clara's arms, something passed between them, unspoken but solid. Not a promise, not a plan. Just understanding. That night, after the children were asleep, Evelyn came back into the kitchen to stoke the fire. Solomon sat at the table, lantern low, ledger open in front of him. I've been thinking, he said without looking up. Come spring, I'll need help with the planting. She added a log to the flames. You'll have it. I mean long term, he said. It's too much for me and Owen alone. Evelyn turned, brushing ash from her skirt. You asking me to stay on as help? I'm asking if you'd want to make a life here, he said, raising his eyes to hers. Not as a guest, not just as the children's comfort, as mine. The fire snapped once, loud in the stillness. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice low. You sure the ground won't shift? It might, he said, but I'd rather stand on it with you than alone. She looked down at his hands, calloused and still, then reached out and laid hers over them. I'll stay, she said, if we build it together. And he nodded because they already had. The snow held through the end of December, pressing the world into stillness. Evelyn kept the stove burning day and night, and when the wind rattled across the chimney, she added another log without waiting for Solomon to ask. He had begun leaving his coat on the peg instead of the chair, and she no longer hesitated before moving through the house as if it were hers. One morning, after a long stretch of gray, the sky cleared, and Solomon found her outside, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hammering the ice loose from the pump handle with the back of a hatchet. Olive knelt nearby, filling buckets with snow to melt. You could have waited, he said, stepping outside with his gloves half on. I was warm enough, she said, without glancing up. Besides, Clara said the wash water was near gone. He stood beside her as the ice broke loose in a clean snap. You always this stubborn? I don't hold still well, she said. Never have. Solomon took the hatchet from her hand, set it aside, and turned the pump until the first sputter of water came through. Then I'll stop standing in your way, he said. But only if you stop doing everything before I get to it. She looked up at him then, her eyes squinting under the sun. I thought you liked things done quiet. I like them done with someone, he said. Later that day, while the girls played in the loft and Ruth napped curled beneath the quilt Evelyn had stitched from old feed sacks, Solomon brought down a crate from the attic. He set it on the table without a word and opened the lid. Inside were Mary's books, lined in worn leather and faded linen. He lifted one and placed it gently in front of Evelyn. She used to read aloud while I repaired harnesses, he said. She marked her pages with bits of dried grass. Evelyn traced the edge of the cover but didn't open it. You sure you want me to have these? I want them used, he said. And I want the children to hear stories again. Evelyn nodded and turned to the next book in the stack. Then I'll read to them tonight. That evening, as the lantern hissed and the fire dulled to an amber glow, Evelyn sat in the rocking chair with the book open on her lap. Clara leaned against her side. Olive curled up at her feet, Owen listening from the bench with a whittled stick in his hand. Solomon watched from the doorway, arms crossed loosely, his posture relaxed in a way it hadn't been since summer. When the chapter ended and the children drifted off to bed, Evelyn closed the book and set it gently aside. Did you ever want more? She asked after a moment. Then this land? This house? I used to think I did, Solomon said, stepping closer. But then I realized I wanted something that held. Evelyn stood, brushing her skirt smooth. I've lived through things that didn't. I know, he said, but this is different. She stepped toward him. Why? Because it's not just survival anymore, he said. It's choice. They were standing close now, close enough to feel each other's breath in the hush between words. I choose you, she said softly. He reached up and brushed her braid back over her shoulder. And I choose you. When their lips met, it wasn't rushed or uncertain. It was quiet and sure, like snow melting under sun. Her hands came to rest at his chest, his arms around her waist. The fire crackled gently, and in the silence that followed, neither of them stepped back. The days that followed moved slow and full. Solomon taught Olive how to tie a slipknot for the feed gate. Evelyn showed Owen how to patch the lining of his coat using the back of a flour sack. Clara and Olive started weaving straw into small mats, proud to lay them by the door. Ruth took her first steps between Evelyn's skirt and Solomon's boot, squealing with laughter as she toppled into his arms. By the time the thaw came, the house had changed. Not in shape, but in feeling. There was no longer a guest at the table. There was no division between past and present, only what they chose to carry forward. On a morning that smelled faintly of thawed earth and wood smoke, Solomon hitched the wagon and took Evelyn to town. The children stayed behind with a neighbor's boy who had ridden down with a sack of cornmeal and stayed long enough to earn pie and a story. They stood before the circuit judge in a room that smelled of ink and worn wool. No one dressed fine. There were no flowers, just hands joined and words spoken clear. Evelyn Grant became Evelyn Avery with a simple nod and a dry-voiced, "So be it." As they stepped back into the cold, Solomon offered his arm, and she took it without hesitation. "I never expected this," she said, looking out at the snow melting into ruts along the road. "Neither did I," he said. "But I'm glad it found us anyway." That night, they returned to the ranch to find Clara asleep in front of the fire and Olive curled next to her, Ruth snoring gently in the cradle. Owen waited at the table, trying not to look eager. When he saw them come through the door, he stood. "You did it." Solomon nodded. "We did." Owen looked at Evelyn, then back at his father. "Feels right." "It is," Evelyn said. "Now go on to bed. We've all got chores in the morning." In the months that followed, the land warmed, and the fields opened. Trees budded, calves were born, and the windows stayed open longer each night. Evelyn planted herbs in the back corner of the yard, and Solomon built her a bench beside them. The family grew into its shape, not patched together, but woven, strong across the seams. And on the days when Evelyn walked into the field with Solomon at her side, her hand in his, she didn't look over her shoulder anymore. She didn't have to. She had found her home.